Is that good?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I'm going to tell you a little story.
Okay.
So, it was early 1960s, and I was in the back of a brand new Rambler station wagon, and it was the latest thing on the market. Before the Rambler, we had an old Chevy. But it was a time when there were no seat belts, and so if your dad slammed on the brakes, your little brother would go into the seat in front of him, and the little baby could sit in there, and it was just on two hooks, and it had a little steering wheel and a little beep beep horn, so they could pretend like they were driving next to your father who was driving. So we went down the road, finally got to our destination, and we pulled over, and a huge, big, giant bear came over to our car and stood up on its hind legs and started just shaking our car. We were in Yellowstone National Park.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
We were really in Yellowstone National Park. And my mother didn't have the gene. She didn't inherit the gene that told you when there was danger. And so she was saying, "Where's the camera? Where's the camera? I'm going to get out of the car and I'm going to take a picture of the bear." And all of us kids in the car were saying, "No, no, please don't get out of the car. No, Mother." This was my first experience in a national park.
Is it playing?
Yeah, it's playing.
Okay.
So, in the National Geographic recent issue, let's see, January 2016, talks about the national parks, and there's a quote: "In 1798, sitting on the banks of the River Wye, William Wordsworth marveled at how an eye made quiet by the power of harmony offered relief from the fever of the world." And that's what can happen when we're out in the national parks. You can't help, when you're at Zion's, you can't help but look up, because everywhere above you is these huge, magnificent cliffs. And so the thing that national parks are for people. It's for the people of the United States to be able to come outside and see some beauties that just aren't around them in the big cities. And people come from all around the world to visit Zion's and see this amazing place. A place that is like no other in the whole world. And so it can be a real peace to your soul, and it can rejuvenate you. In the National Geographic, it talked about it can increase your creativity and just does things to your brain that can't happen any other way. And so that's something to think about. So one of the things that I really like about Zion's is that the light and color is always changing. And so you as an artist, even if it's the same scene you painted before 100 times, it can be all different because of the weather, because of the light, the sunlight hitting different rocks. There's a lot of atmosphere to try to capture in the out of doors. So it's the 100th anniversary of the national parks. There's a gallery, a museum down in St. George and they're having a show for artists, and they want us to paint pictures of the national parks. And the thing that I like about national parks is that it's a place where people meet the landscape, they meet the wildlife. But one of the most interesting things is watching the people. Me and my husband were driving up in Yellowstone maybe a couple of years ago. And we were driving on the road, and we saw a whole bunch of people. And they were on top of this little knoll. And we pulled over, we parked the car, and we climbed up to the knoll. And people were so excited up there. They had spotting scopes, they had binoculars, they had cameras, and they were looking all over, and they were watching for wolves. And the wolves were like maybe 5 miles away, and when you looked through the binoculars, you could just see a little white dot and maybe a black dot, and the people knew who the wolves were, and they would let you look through their spotting scopes, and they just were looking, waiting, watching for these wolves. And so I thought that would make an interesting painting to show those people up on the knoll in Yellowstone. And I guess a lot of people, when they think, oh, I'm going to do a painting of Yellowstone, they would think, well, a geyser, or bubbling hot pots, or buffalo, something like that. But I thought this painting of the people up on the knoll would be good, and I'm going to call it the Wolf Watchers. So the first thing I need to do is I took a bunch of pictures, and now I've got to kind of sketch the people, and I want the most exciting poses, and I want to show that feeling that was there of excitement being out in nature and just trying to capture a glimpse of wildlife. We see when we first came up here.
Was it
Yeah,
deer? Deer.
yeah,
Saw deer.
just very close to us, and we just watched it walk
Yep.
by.
You took a video of it.
Yeah, all right. Thank you for your help. So I've got a big group of people, and everybody is doing something different. So I want to look at the pictures I have of the group, and I want to do some sketches, find out what's some of the most interesting poses of the group. I also want to think about the wolf and what he's going to look like, and start thinking about him. So one of the first things I did was do some sketches of some of the people, just to start to know the people, some of the interesting poses, what's going to look good in the group. I want a good variety, so I'm thinking about angle, shapes. Also, there's someone with a Yellowstone bag there, so that will kind of identify where they are at. I want a variety of women, men, and kids. So even though I have individuals in the group, I always also have to think about what's the design going to be of the overall picture. So I've got a group of people, but they are going to be a shape in and of themselves, with dark and light going through it. And what am I going to have in the background? Where will the background meet the group? what's going to have the greatest impact. So I have to think about that. Do I want a horizontal picture, or do I want a portrait style picture? Where do I want the group to be? Is it going to be up here, so very prominent? And I have a picture, but I'm also going off of memory. And the memory is going to have a great effect on what I draw. So I want the wolf somewhere in the background, and they aren't noticing because they're all looking off in this direction. So I've kind of got my figures drawn the way I want them. I'm still adding a few and seeing how they look with the group. I'm worried about the design of the entire group, but I'm also thinking about the design of the individuals. I have to make sure I maintain the angles and don't try to straighten up the people, because a lot of the motion comes from the angles that I draw. I also have to make sure they're well grounded and that they look like they're standing on the ground. So I've kind of got the figures the way that I want on a piece of tracing paper, and I can turn it over, because then you can look at the drawing with a new eye and kind of tell if anything jumps out at you and really looks wrong. It's easier to see. You can also put it up in a mirror or do this in Photoshop, and immediately a figure jumps out at me, and I know that he just looks a little big, and so I have to make sure I change that. But overall, I like the movement that's going on.